Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to answer like a super common question that I get, and I'm going to try to answer it in detail that applies to you, so stick around till the end. And that is the subject of what or how long does it take to form an offshore structure? And if you want your structures formed super fast, you should click the subscribe button and the notification bell. Anyway, let's jump into this topic. So very often, I mean, for obvious reasons, people come to me and they say, hey, listen, how long does it take to form a structure? And the answer, of course, is it depends, right? It depends on the jurisdictions that we're dealing with. If Corona hits and suddenly, you get stuck halfway through the process, this is going to change things, etc. But I'm going to give you kind of some loose numbers that are going to help you to understand, and I'm going to try and talk you through some ways that over the years we've learned to speed up certain parts of the process and the areas that are likely to be sticking points regardless, okay? So, first of all, let's talk about forming companies. Well, in a structure in general, you're typically going to have potentially trusts, potentially nominees, trustees. You're going to have corporations. You're going to have bank accounts. You may have payment processing, and you may have some sort of different payment solutions, and that's on top of if you have residency concerns, etc. Okay, so getting nominees. Normally, nominees are fairly accessible, so that takes a few days up to, let's say, 2 weeks to get paperwork, right? Trusts. Drafting trusts, I would say, typically takes 2 to 6 weeks for a good trust. So if you're just getting like a boilerplate trust, which I always say is a horrible idea, very, very bad idea, don't do it. You will think that you're saving a few $1,000s, and you're probably putting yourself at risk of losing many, 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 many more thousands of dollars along the way. So that's generally not a good idea, but if you need it, that's one thing. So 2 to 6 weeks, depending on what's going on. Now, this brings us into the next part, which is a big part of the process of forming a corporate structure is that you need to provide some documentation, okay? You need to provide some paperwork. And that's typically going to be copies of your passport, proof of address, maybe letters of reference letters from lawyers, banks, etc., possibly bank statements, etc., right? These sorts of things. Well, how long that takes you to get those things together is going to make a big difference. And some people are quite slow on that. Some people are right on top of it. They're quite fast, okay? If you're fast, let's assume that you're able to get those things quickly because you've just got them right on hand, which is not necessarily the case. Then, hey, we can kind of like gloss over that. But you need to add that into the process, and it might factor into, well, for sure it will factor into some extent in the trust, going through KYC with respect to working with a trustee, etc. But then also the trust planning might take some back and forth in there as well. So the point is that your role in going back and forth can provide infinite flex depending on how quickly you are getting back, right? But let's just assume that you're like right on the ball, which some people are fantastic in that regard. Some people not so much. Okay, this brings us into companies. Companies, I would say, typically take 1 to 2 weeks to form, depending on where they are. They can take as little as they can be done same day. In some places, you can get companies done same day. Usually, sometimes there's like a rush service that you can pay for, but there's really no point. So that's not really a big deal. And on the high end, companies can take about a month to form. Okay, so for instance, places like Gibraltar tend to be quite slow in terms of going through it. Now, part of that is the due diligence, they're just more rigorous about what it is they expect. So, but let's say that your range is a week to a month, and your typical norm is you should expect a week to 2 weeks to form a company. In most parts of the world, I would say a week to 2 weeks to form a company, you're good. Okay, so now let's keep in mind here, what you might have is you might have a multi-tiered structure, okay? So in a multi-tiered structure, you might have a trust, which owns a company, which owns another company, which has banking, which has, so on and so forth. We try not to build structures this way. So in theory, what would happen is you would say, okay, it's going to take, let's say, 6 weeks to get a trust. Then on top of that, we're going to add a company. Let's say that's going to take another 2 weeks. We're up to 8. Then we have another company that's going to take another 2 weeks. So now we're up to 10. Then we're going to start doing banking, et cetera, et cetera. This starts to bloat, right? So what we try to do now is we try to kind of like reverse it, and we say, okay, instead let's break it up into pieces. Let's form all the companies at the same time. Then let's put it all together, and once it's all set up, right? So we form the companies, we open the bank accounts. You can't open the bank accounts until you've got the companies. You typically can't get payment processing until you have bank accounts. So you've got these things that are, there's kind of a certain sequence here, right? And so let's talk about that. Okay, So we've got our companies. Now we have to deal with banking. Oh boy. Banking is crazy, right? Just a crazy, horrible thing to go through these days. I would say in the modern day, unless you're talking about, okay, let's say that you're doing like on the short end, you know, good EMIs, maybe you get 2 weeks, right? I would say for a non-EMI, and you know, maybe you can do a week, but let's just say 2 weeks. 2 weeks for like an EMI typically. On the other end, you're talking about, you know, a good scenario is a month, okay? That's like a good scenario. In some cases, banking could take you 6 months. Like, it's just a horrible, horrible process, you know? They're slow. You have to get them a lot of paperwork. The documents have to be certified in special ways, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a pain. You definitely don't want to have to, but that's the reality. So what I normally tell people is I normally say, okay, if you just have a company and a bank account, you can usually get it done in most scenarios in 2 months, right? Like that's your normal, and you could possibly have a nominee, you can throw whatever in there. So that's the case. If you want to add another layer, if you want to add a trust in, if you want to add these other things, you're looking at probably 3 months, okay? So most of the time, you should be able to form a structure in 3 months. Now, there's some other caveats here, such as maybe your company needs to register for VAT. In the US, maybe you need to get an EIN. So in the US, the way it works is you form a company. Forming a company is quite quick, let's say a week. Then you need to get an EIN. Now an EIN normally takes 2 to 3 weeks, but with Corona, it can take well in excess of a month, right? So that's an issue. Now, if you're a local, then it's much faster. You can get it very quick. But as a foreigner, then you need a bank account. The banks typically are going to tell you it's 2 weeks till they get back to you or something. But in reality, I find that it's maybe more like 3. So again, you're kind of at, without Corona, I would say you're like a 2-month process. With Corona, you're just in a crazy spot. Now let's add payment processing onto that. Payment processing, unfortunately, like you better expect a month. Unless you're talking about someplace like Stripe, PayPal, these guys are quite good. But if you're talking about conventional, old school, high risk, whatever payment processing, yeah, expect a month. And that's assuming you can get them the information, you're prepared, you have everything set up. They're going to go through things with a fine-tooth comb. It's going to be a royal nightmare, but you know, you can get this done. So what I generally tell people is I generally tell them if you have a very simple structure, 2 months, you can get things faster, but you know, just expect that. If you're talking about a bigger, more complex structure, 3 to 4 months. That's kind of like the range that you're talking about. So anyway, I hope that helps you. I hope it gives you a little bit of context. Obviously, you know, you have to plan out what's going on there, and this is the other part is, all right, what does it take to get the planning going? Well, the planning can take, you know, I would say about 4 weeks if you do it like a thorough, proper analysis. You collect all the data, you go through doing an analysis of all the applicable laws, make sure that your tax structure is going to be legal, your asset protection is going to be solid, et cetera, et cetera. It's about 4 weeks, okay? So that kind of can be factored into this sort of structure. Anyway, I hope that helps you. If you would like to, you know, have some help about, hey, what should you structure, where should you be, help with forming things, et cetera, reach out to us, www.clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer. There's a link below. You can also check out offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com, and click the subscribe button, click the like button. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. Check out our other videos. I'm going to see you guys on the next video.